Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Holosun AEMS. The latest optic from Holosun is kind of a rifle-centric, small footprint, squarish optic. And you may be asking yourself, like, why does Holosun need another rifle-centric optic when they already have quite a few? And initially, that was kind of my first response as well. But I do understand that companies are going to take repeated looks at their product line and see if what they're providing is going to be advantageous. Also, when they come up with new concepts or new ideas to introduce new features or improvement on features into optics, they may not be able to do that with the existing products they already have. So sometimes we have totally new and revolutionary products that come along, and I think the Ames falls into that category. What you're getting with the new Ames Reflex sight is a 7075 aluminum body optic that does have a proprietary footprint, which we'll talk a little bit about here shortly. It has the same reticle features that you've come to know from Holosun, being the 2 MOA dot and then a segmented circle ring, which is usually dependent on the size of the viewing window. In this case, the ring is 65 MOA, which, as we know with other optics that have similar reticles, and of course the Holosun optics that have the segmented circle reticles, can be used for rough distance estimation or quick sight picture acquisition at closer distances. Powered by a 2032 battery with a battery life of 20,000 up to 50,000 hours. And of course, kind of stepping backward just a little bit to the reticle can be run as a 2 MOA dot and the segmented circle, or the segmented circle can be turned off. And of course, we have dual power modes. Battery power, solar power, dual power, or you could run strict solar with it. In fact, one of the first things I did when I got it, when I took it out of the box, is completely remove the 2032 side load battery, and I still had a usable reticle. And this is something that's come up in videos in the past where some people are like, well, if you take the battery out, the optic doesn't work. That's not the case with the optics that I have, and this is definitely one that I wanted to check specifically. If you absolutely had to, you could, yes, run the optic just on solar power alone. Of course, it is a side load battery, and then we've got our adjustment controls, our up and down, plus and minus brightness on the left side of the optic, which to me makes the most sense for rifle-centric optics, or just optics in general, because most people are right-handed. Me, this is coming from a left-handed person, although I do shoot rifle right-handed. It just makes more sense to be able to keep the controlling hand on the firearm while you make any adjustments you're going to make. Of course, you have multiple brightness settings, including the night vision settings, which is something, again, I'll talk about as we get into it. And all of this kind of combines to give you a very usable, very feature-packed little optic, unfortunately with a proprietary footprint. And I generally like to keep my mounts as simple as possible, so I try to have one footprint if I can get away with it. But I do understand that's not necessarily going to be the case. When it comes to LEDs, electronic optics like that, we don't get the same modularity, I guess, that we get from magnified optics. With red dots, sometimes companies want to go their own way and not use an existing footprint that's out there, or even if that footprint is very popular, they choose their own, and there's reasons for that, I'm sure. So this optic right now, mounts are going to be kind of limited, but it does come with a mount which gives it kind of a true co-witness-ish to lower 1/3, somewhere right in there in the middle as far as height goes. Something it didn't really bother me during the review process, because I was mounting it on a BNT APC. APC generally based just on the cheek weld, the way that firearm is designed. You can get optics that sit lower, and it's still more comfortable to get a natural cheek position, or head position, I should say, when you shoot the firearm. And of course, as with almost all things firearms related, I'm going to do a 2,000 round review process. First 500 rounds, I just wanted to get a really good feel for the optic and get an idea of how well it was going to perform. Used it in varied lighting conditions throughout the review process, but just starting out, it was kind of right out the gate, was able to, of course, get it on the range during daylight, but also use it under low light and night vision for passive aiming. And the optic performs as I would expect. It's got a really crisp reticle, which is something I've really always liked about Holosun, is how consistent their reticles are from optic to optic, not just in one particular optic brand or style, but across the board. They always have really clean reticles, in my experience, with the Holosun optics that I've had. Using it under night vision, I generally pick one setting and adjust plus or minus maybe one, because I don't want to have to be screwing with my brightness settings, transitioning from one lighting condition to another. Even under night vision, I still run it pretty bright, because I want to be able to easily transition from night vision to white light without having to screw with buttons. And that's just something that I carry over from my professional experience of not wanting to be pressing buttons when I might need to be pointing guns at people. So that's something I'm going to do. Night vision settings are great. It's generally not something I'm going to use. I do, of course, check them out to see, obviously, how well they work. But technically every optic has a night vision setting, because all night vision does is amplify light. So even if you go down to your lowest brightness setting, it's not called a night vision setting, but it might as well be, because what it's doing is magnifying the light so you can see it. After that first 500 rounds, going to get into, of course, drop testing. But before we get to that, the burn down. 500 rounds as quick as possible to see if that accelerated rate of fire will identify any issues that I wouldn't otherwise notice with the optic firing the same amount of rounds over a much longer period of time. Now, in regards to optics, usually a burn down, I'm looking for that increased heat causing any issues. As the firearm heats up and that heat transfers into the optic body, is that going to go identify any issues? Generally not something I worry about, especially with rifle optics, but it is something we want to look at. Of course, some people come here for the burn down, so here is the burn down. First to last round, no issues. One thing I'm always looking for, and I talked a little bit about that heat, sometimes that heat causes the reticle to flicker or fade or experience some kind of visual issue that's noticeable. I've had that happen with optics in the past, especially when they're mounted lower or they're mounted closer to the receiver or the prime generation of heat in the firearm. Happy to report the Ames did not experience any problems like that. So after that, 1,000 rounds in, just use the optic for my general practice, what I'm working on. This optic isn't submachine gun centric, but I figured, you know, I'm always mounting things on rifles. I wanted to train it up a little bit, and I also wanted to get in some more time on my APC, using it just for my general practice. When I go to the range, if I'm doing rifle stuff, I can take the rifle out and use a submachine gun and accomplish the same tasks. I just may not shoot as far, although you certainly can within those intermediate distances. But just using the APC for, you know, what I'd use it for. One of the things you appreciate quickly about this optic is how generous the eye box is. My objective lens, my ocular lens, how overall I have a very good size with a very clean reticle. And one of the things that I take away from it, especially because me, I don't generally use the segmented circle. I'll turn that off and just use that 2 MOA dot, which gives me a whole lot of window left, right, above, and below that dot, which gives me a great field of vision at close and extended distances. And one of the problems with smaller optics or smaller windows we have at these closer distances, they do tend to block some of the target, and it cause a little visual confusion with changing focal planes or focal depths, moving from maybe close to not so close or not so close to not really that close. So from close to medium to far. The smaller the objective window is, the less of that target you're able to see through the objective window. You move your eyes, it may block them. So if I'm transitioning left to right or right to left, or even going from near to far, far to near, the optic body, the objective window size can dictate how cleanly you can make that visual transition, because you don't have to move into the optic body out of the way. Of course, final thing being durability. Is this going to be a durable optic? One of the things that's built right into it is see-through lens caps, which they don't call them this, but I'm going to call them this: sacrificial lenses. They are screw attached, so replacing them wouldn't be super easy, but totally doable if Holosun wanted to provide the option like, hey, here, we'll sell these, or of course you got to send the optic in. It would make much more sense to me if they would just sell them separately so I could replace them, because I'm going to break them. I like the fact that they're there because they give us increased rigidity and a likely impact point for the optic body itself, which is going to be important here in a second. I don't really need them when I was shooting. Generally, I just flip them down. I don't notice any visual distortion or added parallax when the caps are up, because you see right through them, but I don't need them to be there. So I would just flip them down, especially that front one, just keep it out of the way. But for durability's sake, I'm glad that they're there, because If you're going to use this optic on a rifle that's going to be used in force on force, like UTM or something like that, now you've got a sacrificial lens in case you're going to take a UTM or a simunition hit. You don't want to break the optic. It's much better if it would just break that little window. And the inadvertent contact with the environment. A rifle slung, maybe it's not as snug, maybe you're moving around, you're working through doors, something like that. You put it in the safe and it falls over. You put it on the tailgate and it falls off. There's all kinds of ways that optics get broken every day in the United States. So having an optic that has a little bit more protection like these lens caps is a pretty cool feature. But I drop stuff on purpose every 500 rounds. Before we get to that, I want to show you guys a 5-round group I fired at the zero distance. Just because it was going on the APC, I just wanted to head and did a really quick 25-yard zero. So here is that zero before the very first drop test. And here are your 4 drop tests. That last drop test, I actually broke the pick rail off my APC. I already ordered another one, which surprisingly, B&T products can be somewhat hard to come by, but their accessories aren't, so at least there's that. I also broke the little door off the bottom guard, but the optic was fine. So 4 drop tests, at least from functionality, everything's good. Here's my final 5-round group, fired at the same distance using the same ammunition, 25 yards, 124 grain gold dot. I would call that zero maintained. Over the 2,000 round review process, this has been a great little optic to use. Initially, I kind of didn't understand why Holosun was adding a SKU, adding another product to a, let's be honest, a large product line. I think I get it though, because it gives me features that I couldn't get and a size profile and an objective window size that I couldn't get from some of the other optics that they offer. So I've got a minimal footprint that's going to go on the weapon, and I've also got that squarish, larger field of view, and I've got some of their newest updated technology when it comes to circuitry, performance, reticle behavior, brightness settings, night vision settings, side load battery, all that stuff. So it's almost like this is the modernization of a lot of the technologies and a lot of the features you've gotten from their optics in the past. And as we've seen with Holosun over the past decade, their quality continues to improve over where they started. Now they're at a point where they're rightfully so competitive to some of the more well-known, more legacy brands of optic companies that have always been considered the top tier or the gold standard. Holosun is quickly becoming one of those, and it's definitely become an optic that I would certainly trust, or I say an optic brand that I would certainly trust my life to in many applications. And this definitely is one of them. I think this is a great little optic. I think it fills a really good footprint. My only real complaint is the footprint. I wish it had gone with maybe an aim point style or something like that to make mounts more readily accessible, because generally if an optic comes with a mount from the factory, I'm probably not going to like the mount, and this isn't really any different. There's nothing wrong with the mount, but it's not the right height for what I want to use it for. I already have a second one of these and I have it mounted on a rifle, and it sits too low, and I don't have an option to get it to sit any higher yet because there's no aftermarket options currently for this mounting profile. But that's okay, because going forward, I'm sure this optic is going to celebrate some popularity and people are going to make mounts for it, at least fingers crossed. So if you're curious about the newest offering from Holosun, this is a great optic, and it fills a niche for those people. Round versus square, round versus square, round versus square. If you're in the square camp of how you want your objective field of view in your optic, you now have another square option from Holosun that's going to have lightweight, minimal footprint, extended great battery life, easy change of battery life, multiple brightness settings, night vision settings, and an optic that's going to perform well with a crisp, clean LED that's not susceptible to fast movements or heat variations or anything like that, that has some cool features built in, such as, you know, flip down lens caps and stuff like that. So it's kind of a feature packed little guy for a very reasonable price, and it would be at home as easily on a PCC or a submachine gun as it would on a rifle. So if you're curious about how I feel about the Ames, that's it. I think it's a cool optic, and it's definitely something you should look at if you're in the market for another optic and you don't want to spend a ridiculous amount of money. I'm Eric with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.